This is DMG, welcome to 7D System, and in this video we're going to talk about multiple narrative threads, the magic that brings everything together. So if you'd like to support these videos, check out patreon.com/7D System. So, we've talked about narrative threads all the way through the 3-act structure and the different narrative points that happen within each act. So that is a single thread which you would have multiple of those in a story. Now, some people would struggle with that and say, well, isn't there ones? Why do you want 6 or 7 stories happening at the same time? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use Star Wars as an example, because Star Wars, it's very clearly defined what all these things are, who the characters are, and everyone knows it. So the first thing you have to realize is who is Star Wars? Whose story is it? The main story of Star Wars, who's in it? People will say, it's Luke Skywalker. No, it's the story of Leia, or it's the story of Han Solo, or it's the story of all of them combined. Star Wars, Episode 4 through Episode 6, are about R2D2 and C3P0. 2 droids that are having an adventure that's running across 3 movies. The film is not actually about Luke, it's not about Leia, it's not about Han Solo, it is about these 2 droids. These are the main characters of the actual film. Everything else happens around the droids. So, to an extent, you could argue that Luke, Leia, Han Solo, and, all Obiwan, etc. are all NPCs. But I'm going to take them as actual player characters that you could actually have as players in the game. So, they would be coming in at different stages. So you can do it that way, or you can run some of them as NPCs, or all of them as NPCs, with R2D2 and C3PO as characters. With R2D2 and C3PO as characters, when we think about the beginning of the story, what's actually happening? Well, there's the hook. So the hook is that R2D2 encounters Princess Leia. And the hook is that Princess Leia gets him to record this message and wants him to take it to Obiwan Kinobi. Now, as we talked about in the other videos on storytelling, the next part is the choice. R2D2 and C3PO have a choice now. Are they actually going to deliver these plans to Obiwan Kenobi? We find out they've been, running around with the rebels. They're on the ship, and R2D2 says, we need to get to an escape pod. And C3PO says, well, I'm not getting in there with you. So there's a refusal of the call to adventure that's happening in this. The only thing that's really missing from this component is the mentor part. So what does happen is you immediately have a clock. And the clock starts ticking because they've got to get off the ship because the Empire has arrived. And they must vamos. So they hop in the escape pod and off to the planet. But when they're on the planet, we're now at the gateway. They're stuck in the middle of a desert, and they've got to get away from all the Jawas and all these sort of things. So, that's what happens. So once they have gotten away from the Jawas, we're now in the second act where they're starting to be tested. So now, they're finding out what the droids are good for. Luke and his uncle Owen are finding out what these droids are good for. So, this is where the tests of the droids and everything start to happen. And the preparation begins because, R2D2's quest is to find Obi-Wan to deliver these plans. It's the MacGuffin. It doesn't matter what plans they are. At this point, we don't know it's the plans for the Death Star. We just want to get to the plans to Obi-Wan. So in this sense, Luke at this point is an NPC. But he could be a player. So if we were introducing a player at this point, so we've already got 2 characters that have progressed along their own storyline, and now we're dropping in Luke. So let's look at it from Luke's perspective. All right. So the other characters, their storyline is continuing on. But now we're starting a new storyline that's going to be interwoven with the storyline of the 2 droids. And that's Luke. So Luke's hook is these 2 droids arrive. Okay. This is his hook. And then he has a choice once one of the droids escapes. he's got a choice to make whether he goes out now or goes to find it in the morning. He must go and find this droid. And the clock is that he's got to do it before his uncle finds out. So he's got to get onto that, the speeder and get out there and find R2D2. And he takes C3PO along with him for the ride. So, as I said, you can introduce parts of these narrative threads in different orders. So, because we didn't have the mentor character in the R2D2 C3PO section, the mentor character is now coming in as Luke's mentor. So the story is starting to shift dynamic now. So, there's still a mentor character. This is still a storyline which everyone is involved in. But the droids are at a different stage in their story development. So the major event, that happens in the second act of the droids is that, they find Obi-Wan. So this is the major event, what would normally be the big boss battle, but they've actually come to Obi-Wan. And so it will begin to continue on again. So what will actually start to happen is the droid story will come to an end point and then start again within the actual structure of the film. And Luke's story will continue over that ending. And so you've got multiple starts and endings happening at different periods. So you've now got Obi-Wan in the mix. Now Obi-Wan's hook is, along come these droids with plans to destroy the Death Star, and along comes Luke. So he's got now a choice. He can choose to ignore Luke, or he can choose to, help him out. Or he can choose to ignore getting the plans to the rebels, or he can choose to help them out. So he's got the moral imperative comes into play here. He then makes a choice. He decides he's going to help this boy and these droids. Two separate stories, and now he is the third story. Even though he's the mentor character for the boy, he is his own character on his own journey, and he goes through the same narrative thread structure through the narrative of the film. So jumping ahead, Luke, of course, will then, he will refuse to go on this adventure with Obi-Wan. His uncle and aunt are killed. He makes the choice to continue on after discussing it with Obi-Wan. The clock starts to tick because the Empire is after him. And of course, the gateway is when they get to Mos Eisley and enter into the tavern. Of course, in the tavern, we now start Han Solo's story. Han Solo and Chewbacca are in the tavern. The hook is this old man, this young boy, and two droids rock up in the tavern, and they want to ride, and they don't want any of the Imperials to hear about it. That's the hook. They have to make a choice. What are they going to do? How much money are they going to get out of this? So they're thinking of consequences. What are the monetary rewards for us continuing on this journey with these lunatics and their two droids? Again, you have the clock, where the clock in this point, again, the Imperials are coming. We need to get onto the ship as fast as possible and get out of here. And there's other clocks that are happening as well. So you've got several clocks happening. You've got several different variations of a story all happening all at the same time, all within, this one finishes, another one has started before, etc. So this is how multiple narratives are starting to work. So we jump right ahead now, where we've gotten onto the Death Star, and of course Leia's story begins. She's in jail. What happens? Two guys dressed as stormtroopers burst into her cell and say, "We're here to rescue you." And the clock is, everything's going to hell. We need to get the hell out of here. And of course, then her character goes through all the different cycles. This is how you should be looking at your games. So each character can have their own story happening at different narrative threads, at different points within the main story structure. So even though you have, 4 players, that doesn't mean they're all doing the same story all the time, where you get into a situation where, people might be lost. They don't, you know, their character's not really doing anything. They feel like they're just an NPC along for the ride, etc. Because their characters need to be going through these narrative points for their character. And the time at which these narrative points happen can be stretched out. So it doesn't need to be immediately that these things happen. They can be stretched out, and eventually what happens, like in the end of Star Wars, they all meet at one point. So eventually they're all the bounding around and happening and stopping and starting. They all come to the end point at the end of the film. And of course it opens up again for Empire, and then opens up again for Return of the Jedi. But again, the primary characters of these three films are R2D2 and C3PO. So that's the primary story. So you could have a story structure centered around two NPCs, and the adventurers are along for the ride, and they come in and out as one-shot characters or part of the campaign or whatever, and you can actually build the storyline into it using these narrative thread examples that I've given you. And that's just to illustrate how powerful this can actually be in terms of maintaining cohesion and keeping the game moving forward, because you can always start new narrative threads while other narrative threads are continuing on, and then begin to tie them all together. And you can decide how you want to tie them all together, whether it's at the end of 5 sessions, or you only want to tie it again after the end of 15 sessions or something like that. You know, you can make those sort of decisions, but what you want to keep in mind is that each character has their own narrative thread, and that there is an overriding narrative thread that kind of ties everything together, that the line that everything wraps around as it goes through this entire story. So that is multiple narrative threads. So if you like these videos, click the like button. You can also check me out on Facebook and Twitter, and of course support me on Patreon. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.